Hello and welcome to the program. I am Deji. Now, all eyes have been on President Muhammadu Buhari to name his new cabinet since he kicked off his second term of office and dissolved the previous one in May this year. Many Nigerians fear that this may be a repeat of what happened in the president's first tenure when he didn't appoint ministers until almost 6 months after his inauguration. It's a month and over 2 weeks now since the president was sworn in for his second term, and slightly over a month since the National Assembly was formally inaugurated and there were no ministers in place. When you juxtapose the situation with that of South Africa and Senegal, where both presidents appointed or announced their cabinet just days after they were sworn in for their second terms, you would understand why people are so worried about this delay. Now, earlier in the week, Senate President Ahmed Lawan boosted hopes that the ministerial list would be transmitted before the end of the week. I'm talking about last week now. A statement, of course, he later refuted, saying he did not give a definitive time. Also, in a late-night meeting with the leadership of the National Assembly last Thursday, President Buhari admitted that he is under tremendous pressure to name his ministerial nominees. The president said he is taking his time to appoint individuals he knows personally, unlike the last set of ministers, majority of whose recommendations and names he said he accepted from the party and other individuals. Now, whether we admit it or not, this continued delay has a huge impact on the country as a whole, especially the economy. The ministers are the ones who constitute the Federal Executive Council, and failure to inaugurate the council means that all major economic decisions have been placed on hold. Now, the real question is, how much more time do we need to give the president? Joining me now to discuss this further is Frank Tietie, a lawyer who joins us from Abuja. Mr. Tietie, are you surprised that President Buhari up till this moment has not actually named his cabinet, considering what we witnessed in 2015 when it took close to 6 months now before he appointed ministers? Are you surprised that we seem to be witnessing some kind of repeat here?
Well, it will interest you that I am indeed surprised, because if you consider the backlash of what happened in 2015, how the president took Nigerians for granted and seemed to be learning on the job by taking such a long time to appoint his ministers, and what various pundits across the world, I'm talking about the Economist of London and several other organizations, alluding to the fact that the inability of the president to appoint ministers as at that time, with that kind of lack of policy direction, generally affected the thrust of the administration, which made it not to achieve so much, to the huge disappointment of Nigerians. And now, if the president has another opportunity by a second term and to correct that anomaly, then to think that 3 months, more than 40 days, the president is still unable to put together a list of ministerial nominees is indeed surprising. One would have thought that the president would have learned from his mistake, and to probably, if there is a lack of direction, probably just give second tenure to those persons who have served with him as ministers, even though they performed abysmally poor. So I'm indeed very surprised in answer to your question.
Now, what would be your take? Because the president, of course, met with the leadership of the National Assembly, and he's come out to say he's under enormous pressure. Is that enough reason for him not to have named his cabinet? Because everyone would understand that, look, people will definitely be lobbying, and the fact is that the longer he takes in naming his ministers, then the more intense the pressure becomes, especially the lobbying.
You know, it's kind of interesting to subject serious matters like constituting a cabinet to politicking. And when you make mention of the word lobbying, it kind of reduces governance to this whole sharing of resources thing. That's not good for us. That has always been the problem. Now, a serious government will understand that it has a responsibility to put together a team that would deliver on its promises and policies of governance that will benefit the people. It is not for people to jostle, to begin to politic, to begin to lobby for ministerial appointments. That cheapens it. It makes governance like the business as usual, which is sharing of resources without the commensurate responsibility to deliver the benefit of good governance. So it's sad that we still think that the reason why there is a delay on the part of the president in nominating, in having a list of ministerial nominees is as a result of intense politicking, intense lobbying. It's going to be a problem. Well, it also shows that, again, the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari hasn't been very, very prepared, ready for governance. An administration that is ready to hit the ground running should by now, within the period the elections were held and at the time of inauguration, the president ought to have his team ready. And this is confusing and, again, very saddening that it will also have both political and economic implications, negative implications, if the president doesn't make up his mind on his ministerial nominee list.
But what's your own take on what he said? Saying that this time he wants to appoint people he actually knows. That the last time, quite a number of the cabinet members were actually unknown to him. Do you think that could be the reason why we're experiencing this, well, let me call it slight delay now, by his own standard, if you like?
The president cannot claim such kind of personal knowledge of people that would be able to deliver on the campaign promises and developing policies that will drive good governance, the benefit of good governance to Nigerian people. The president, that would be seriously limiting, and that will have very grave consequences for the president to think that he does have the capability to possess the knowledge of personal knowledge of persons that he would have to appoint. The president to be more interested in listening to or sifting what we call good advice from his political advisors. Now, do not forget, because of the constitutional provision that ministers should be appointed from every state of the federation, it is expected that the president can adopt a formula, a means, by requesting that the states put forward their best names. And then he can now consider based on the pedigree of those persons. The president cannot engage on the cabinet. That would be disastrous, because we have seen so far the president must appreciate that he is not very much in touch with all the realities of the various areas that affect governance. So he must rely on the recommendations of stakeholders, not only APC members, but stakeholders in the Nigerian project, who will now recommend persons from the various states of the federation for the purpose of being selected. Now, he should have a think tank that will make these recommendations by way of, the sifting these names that have been recommended to him. The president cannot rely on his personal knowledge of the persons that he intends to appoint as ministers.
For you, how soon do you expect this to be concluded? Because let's face it, he has to still send the names to the National Assembly. The National Assembly would have to vet those names, so there has to be confirmation hearing before a final pronouncement is made. How soon do you expect the process to be concluded, now that the names have actually not been sent to the National Assembly? Anyway?
There is obviously a state of confusion with regards to this list, because what does it take for the president to put together a list? But you see, we have a president that is fixated whenever he has made a decision. He hardly makes changes. He hardly drops any person that he thinks that is not performing or that there is a form of public outcry. He hardly responds to calls for change. So the president is used to taking his time, but you see, that is not very good. Because one would have expected that a president who is desperate to deliver on his promises would not mind to put together a team immediately so that those persons with all the reports he gets that are not performing, he changes them in the course of the administration. So there is no justification, there is no need for the president to dilly-dally, for the president to so waver concerning bringing up a ministerial list. It's a reflection of incompetence. It is not anyway a quality of diligence. It's not a quality that they have been thorough. No, it is affecting Nigerians. It is affecting business. It is affecting policy directions. It is not good for the ministries to be without political leadership at the moment. Now, if you ask me how soon it will take, I can assure you that it is a matter of uncertainty. You cannot predict this president, except that it may just go beyond another 3 months. And don't forget too that it is we have seen a tradition, a culture in the National Assembly that confirmation hearings are merely endorsements. You know, except that there is an overwhelming pieces of evidence against a particular nominee from the stakeholders who are considered very political bigwigs. That is the only time they drop a ministerial nominee. So it hardly happens. So what we expect is that it's the usual tradition of going through the motions of confirmations, and then the persons will be so appointed. So the problem is not with the expectation that there will be a delay in the confirmation hearings, but the fact that it's inexplicable that our president cannot just put together a list within a matter of days and weeks. We have more than enough competent persons within the APC, for example, and Nigerians in general. And one would have expected, again, for the president to use this as an opportunity to showcase that he is indeed a nationalist, contrary to the position that is being held against him, that he's sectionalist in his governance and his choices of appointments.
And of course, when you consider the fact that from what we're hearing, that some of the ministers would be coming back, so it just it's difficult to understand why it's taking this long to submit that list. But let me ask you a final question now before I let you go. There have been suggestions that look, this ministerial nominees, that the nominees, the nominations now should go with portfolios, so that that would properly guide the confirmation process. Senators would know the questions to ask and all of that. So, for instance, if you were nominating, if the president was nominating Mr. A, he should attach the portfolio to that nomination. Is that something you share?
That would have been very progressive indeed, but the 8th Assembly lost it when they could not attempt to even put together either a law. It does require a constitutional amendment for that. But if there had been a law, at least a law, to directing that for the purpose of the ministerial nominees, portfolios be attached, that would have been indeed something that would help us to put to test competencies of the persons that are nominated. Now, we've seen situations of round pegs in square holes in terms of many persons, not only in this administration, in the immediate past administration of this same Buhari, but you see, it would have been good that we give a place to competence in the appointment of ministers. Now, it shouldn't just be politically driven. It should also be driven with some measure of a pedigree of having known to be someone who is excellent and can deliver. So we've seen situations where ministers of education are completely, unable to even understand their mandate, not to talk about even delivering it. So, because they are not qualified. Now, gone are the days in our country where we find that persons are appointed into ministerial positions because of competence, because of known cognate experience that they have gathered. But these days, it is as a result of more or less political patronage, and governance suffers. There is incompetence, and then 4 years will pass and nothing will be achieved because people who are appointed as ministers will continue to learn on the job, learning from civil servants who have ulterior motives in the pieces of advice that they give to these political leaders. That the citizens will always pay a huge price for such forms of incompetence. But I can tell you that since there is no legal basis for that, I doubt if that will ever happen.
Frank Tietie, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for your contributions.
My pleasure.
All right, we'll take a short break, and we'll be right back. On Deji 360, we don't just ask the questions. What is wrong with amending the Constitution the way the National Assembly members have been doing it? We seek answers.
Constitution is constituent.
Our problem is not lack of laws. Our problem is lack of the willpower to implement our laws.
Answers that provide clarity.
While we negotiate, we should try to make it a point that the girls must be complete.
The clarity you need to make informed judgment so that you can make the right decision and take action. People are saying it is you politicians that are responsible for this, that you are the reason why this is happening.
All these dullards that call themselves governors in this country.
I wish we had people like Tony at the National Assembly.
God forbid that I go to join that planet.
Deji 360, providing clarity to issues.